Hello everyone and welcome to Everyday MBA. Interviews with best-selling authors, innovative thought leaders, and top-shelf executives, all sharing their best techniques and tips that you don't learn in business school. I'm your host, Kevin Crane, and I'm so pleased that you're listening. And I am so pleased to welcome Kristen Cox to the show. Chris is a senior executive, a university fellow and instructor, an advisory board member, and the co-author of the new book, Stop Decorating the Fish. It's a guide to identifying the right problem, setting an appropriate objective to solve it, and then avoiding solutions that not only don't work, but may make the problem worse. Kristen Cox, welcome to Everyday MBA. Now, Stop Decorating the Fish is a business fable, and it is the story of a fishing town called Busyville that is facing a major challenge. Can you tell us a little bit of the story and what the challenge is all about?
Sure, and it's definitely a fantasy parable to make some exaggerated points, but there's a town, Busyville, and it basically, its economy relies on fish and fishing, and they're having a problem with the fish population. It's dwindling, and they're trying to figure out, how do we fix this problem? The real challenge, though, for this town and its leaders is they don't know what problem they should be trying to fix. So they chase a lot of different interesting solutions, but they never quite figure out the real problem. And I think we hope it illustrates in a very simple parable the challenges we see organizations facing all the time. They don't know what problem to fix, and so they start chasing the wrong solutions.
So as the story goes, in their efforts to improve the situation, then the town of Busyville then turns to what you call the seductive 7, a set of solutions that pulls them in different directions. Briefly, what are the seductive 7, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and to give you some context for this, I've worked for multiple governors when I was over the Office of Management and Budget for the state of Utah, so the budget for the state and operations. And I started to see these patterns as we would have people come forward with ideas of how to fix problems. And I could almost start to predict what they would ask for. I first called them the fatal 4, and then started to see these other patterns pop up, and then called them the seductive 7. And my co-author saw those same things in the private sector, and we brought them together because I've seen them in private and public. So they're very attractive solutions. They give us the illusion of progress. I'll tell you what they are with a little more context. So we think if we just have more money, if we have more data, if we had another reorganization or a merger or acquisition, somehow that would fix our problem. If we did a more new training or a branding awareness campaign, gave more information to people, that would solve our problem. A new strategy, which is synonymous for a new idea, or more performance and accountability practices. Sometimes we think that will do it, or a new piece of technology. And all of those can be parts of the solution. I use data, I use technology, but what we're saying is those by themselves are never the solution. They are tactics, but they are all about a lack of something. If I just had more data, somehow my problem would go away. If I set up a new AI system or big data or data warehouse or data dashboard, my problems would go away. Data can only help us answer questions. The real thing is, what's the question we need to answer? So these are tactics, but they by themselves are never the solution. And we need to start disciplining ourselves to think a little deeper about what the real problem is.
Is that what you mean by stop decorating the fish?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, stop decorating the fish. In this parable in Busyville, the folks keep trying to fix the fish. They, do a whole data analysis of the fish, and they equip the fish with a new thing of new technology, carbon fiber fish extension to help the fish swim upriver. They keep decorating the problem instead of solving the problem. When we add all these really sophisticated solutions to the mix, we're just decorating the problem. We're not really solving it. We feel really good. We've just launched a new initiative to go digital, but did we really solve the problem for the customer? And those are the solutions. And it's not just that they don't solve the problem. They come with a very high cost. The time, the resources, the energy of the organization shifts to chasing these seductive solutions. And the opportunity cost is that they're not solving the real problem. The system can get burned out. People can get burned out. systems can lose momentum, get very marginal gains in profitability or outcomes. So there are real costs to this.
And you may indeed make the problem worse.
Exactly. You could make the problem worse. In fact, I see this very common. We have more data available to us than any time in history, and we have so much data, it's become noise. And we've lost the ability to see and find the real signal of what to do. So we can make things even more complicated. Systems that are already burdened with too much bureaucracy become even heavier with bureaucracy and new ideas and strategies and initiatives. And we can actually make things worse. It's a very important insight.
Stop decorating the fish. Now, how can our listeners use this fable to help identify problems and set appropriate objectives to solve them?
Yeah. So the first thing we talk about when we work with organizations is you want to start by stopping. It's very difficult to overcome the inertia in our organizations to make real leaps in performance when we're spread thin across chasing all these initiatives. So we often encourage folks to inventory these types of initiatives going on in their organization just as a starting place to see how much time and effort's going into all of these. And when you know, in the book, we have case studies and we show here's the illusion people had around using technology. Here's what they should have been doing, so they can start seeing this. But just start with inventorying what's going on. But the other piece is a problem is never a problem outside the context of the goal. I've learned this very personally when I'm actually blind, Kevin. It's not here or there, but when I was going blind, I had some amazing mentors in my life. And you would think that blindness is the problem, right? But they really helped me understand that you understand the goal, there's lots of different ways to achieve the goal. Vision is a means to an end. It isn't the end. And so when the goal may be get to work, and I can't drive, there's lots of other ways I can get to work. I can Uber, I can ask for a ride, I can walk if I live close enough. So when we get really clear on what is the outcome and the goal, it forces us to think a bit differently about the problem. And we have a culture where we just don't like problems, so we jump to solutions. We just jump. We have a solutions-driven industry. Everybody around us is using the seductive 7. That sounds cool. We go to conferences where people are using these. So we jump to these solutions and we don't even understand what's the goal. And then when we understand the goal, we can understand what's really blocking me from achieving the goal. And that's the problem we want to solve. What's blocking me from achieving the goal, not just how many new solutions and ideas can I chase.
Hi, this is Dory Clark, author of Stand Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And you are listening to Everyday MBA with Kevin Crane.
You know, folks, I have the pleasure of interviewing some of today's top business authors and thought leaders, and I learn a lot, and so do our listeners. Would you like to be a guest on Everyday MBA? Well, I'd love to speak with you too. Are you an author, a thought leader, an entrepreneur, or a consultant? Be a guest. Let's talk about your ideas, why they're important, and what your recommendations are for our listeners. Find out more at everyday-mba.com/guest. That's everyday-mba.com/guest.
You're listening to Everyday MBA.
Our guest today is Kristen Cox. She is the co-author of Stop Decorating the Fish, Which Problems to Ignore and Which Problems Really Matter. She's a senior executive, a university fellow and instructor, and an advisory board member. Now, Kristen, those seductive 7, they are seductive. I mean, they sound pretty good. If we had more technology or the right technology, if we had better data, if we had, a different structure, all of these seem really good. I guess that's what makes them seductive. But you warn us not to go down those paths. So how do I do otherwise?
Yeah, okay. So let's actually use a case study here because it will illustrate, I think, a point. Let's take the example of more data. Okay. And again, data is important, but let's remember data are just facts. They're just numbers and words. That's all they are. The power is what's the question we're trying to answer. And all breakthroughs have come through asking the right question. But let's use one of the case studies from the book. These are all, by the way, all these case studies are for purposes of privacy, we've held back names, but these are all things that have happened in organizations we've worked with. So there's company, and they were a sports retailer. They had a retail outlet, and they wanted to have a better forecast to understand what kind of inventory they needed in their stores. What would people want? So they took their existing forecasting module and spent 6 months trying to improve the forecast. And they added like 40 different indicators, the microclimate of each store, what the economic trends look like in each area. And they just tried to refine the forecast. And we all want that, right? Higher education tries to forecast what occupations will be in demand. We want to forecast what customer demand will be. We all want this. But one thing we all have to realize is that uncertainty is inevitable. We can't overcome uncertainty. So this organization, after all of its efforts, really saw very little impact on its ability to meet the demand of customers and to reduce its inventory. And the question is why? It had this cool new, sophisticated, predictive modeling. Why didn't it work? Well, the reality is that you don't really know what customers want until you're about 1 or 2 weeks in the season. The traditional retail fashion industry tries to predict customer demand 6 months out. In reality, you really don't know what they want for 2 weeks into the season. So it's not about predicting. It's about how do you react quickly with real information within the season. So how do you create a supply chain that can see what the customer demand is and within 2 weeks actually deliver a product to the store, and to be much more reactive in the supply chain than trying to predict the future. Zara is an example who does this very well. They've actually been able to get their supply chain down so they're real nimble and can react to real demand versus trying to forecast what the demand will be. So that's an example of how data can be incredibly powerful, but it's all about what's the question you're trying to ask. And that comes from our own intuition, our ability to think logically and clearly. It's not about doing a huge data study. If you think about the big breakthroughs in science from, Einstein on, it didn't come from a big data dump. It came from really good, clear thinking and the ability to ask some critical and important fundamental questions. So that's an example of how data is important, one of the seductive 7, but let's realize it's just a tool. And if we have a tool, we know specifically what we're trying to use it for.
All right, then how do I define a problem? Indeed, some problems aren't worth solving. So I guess I have 2 questions. When should I know to ignore a problem when it's not big enough to warrant my effort? And then how do I know once I've selected a problem, how to clearly define it well enough that I move forward with productivity?
That's a great question. And I will say this, there's no simple way to say, hey, everyone, if you just follow these, simple steps, you'll know all your problems. But I will give you some steps to follow, but it does take practice. Number 1, know what your goal is. And I cannot emphasize this enough. We see organizations time and time again. And let me get very clear on this, because if people do not get this first step right, it's very difficult to uncover the problem. Goals aren't just these fluffy terms we use just for fun. We use it as a way to diagnose the problem. So, Chuck Yeager in the 1940s wanted to travel faster than the speed of sound. He had a very clear goal: travel faster than the speed of sound. It wasn't until they started taking their aircrafts up in the air and pushing the speed limit. It wasn't until they started to attempt to travel faster than the speed of sound that they came up what was really blocking them from achieving the goal, which was the sound barrier. The sound barrier was simply a bunch of sound waves that would build up in front of the airplane and create a lot of drag and instability on the plane. And the faster they went, the more likely they were to hit the sound barrier. So they understood the limitation to brake was what was blocking them from achieving the goal. So we set the goals to be ambitious. We can't achieve those with our existing resources. So if you have an ambitious goal to, let's take something to increase your, or to reduce your supply chain. No, let's even say this, to increase your profitability by 50%. It's a pretty ambitious goal. You can't achieve that doing what you're doing today. And you've got to ask yourself, if I just add a new data system, is that really going to achieve it? If I add this new piece of technology, is that going to achieve it? And when you look at the seductive 7, when you just say, I'm going to add something, without really thinking about why am I adding this? What will it accomplish? What's blocking me? We want to actually create uncertainty that forces us to think a little bit deeper. So we want to set the right goal. We really do encourage as a discipline anything that's around the seductive 7. If you're launching a new modernization of your technology, especially things that are really vague, these vague sounding initiatives, anything around the seductive 7, start to inventory those. Pay attention about what's going on there and say, that is not going to be my answer. Those may be tools to help me solve my problem, but they are not the problem. They are enablers, they are facilitators, but they are not the problem. Just starting with that, what's my goal, and do not do this, will help me, or help all of our readers, start to really understand and think deeper about what is blocking me. Is it my supply chain? Is it my ability to be nimble and to react to customer demand? Is it something with my workflow? It's usually something that has to do with a fundamental policy, a measure, or how our workflow is designed, our fundamental belief systems. Those are the things that are really blocking us. And then we're forced to start looking at those versus just, hey, it sounds simple and cool. We'll just do a new piece of technology.
When it comes to solutions, often we're faced with a decision between several solutions that could potentially work, some better than others or whatever. Is there a way that I can then go through a process of selecting the best solution? And how do I know which one is best?
Very good. So a solution for us, and we use this all the time in the business world, right? A strategy, a strategic plan. We believe a strategy is only the direction of a solution. So if you have a solution, you need to understand your problem. I keep going back. What's your problem? What's your problem? If you know your problem, that's like, there's a great quote from Einstein. He said, give me a world problem in 1 hour. I'll spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. When you really know your problem, the solution becomes much, much easier to solve. And it can feel like that's an oversimplified answer. But let me give you another example, and this is very common in government. Government spends billions of dollars on new technology products. Every state has systems to determine if people are eligible for Medicaid or what we now call SNAP, which was food stamps or cash assistance. They're called eligibility systems. Tons of money spent on these systems. I've gone into these systems and they sound great. In fact, if you look at the contract, they're all about the technical design of the technology product. It'll be a rules-based system. It'll integrate legacy systems. It's all the cool vernacular around technology. Very seldom have I seen anyone articulate what the technology is trying to solve. And if you don't know that, you can't even design a solution. And most of these systems, actually, I would dare to say all of them, there's a problem in the workflow. It's taking way too long to process an application. It should only take about 30 minutes if you had all the information. It's taking 30 days. Once I know that it's really a process with my workflow, my goal is to provide, when I know clarity in the goal, my goal is to provide somebody a benefit with it no longer than 10 days. And it's taking me 30 to 45 days. I have a huge gap in performance. Now I have to ask, why is it taking me so long? What's happening in how people work that's making it take so long? And, there's some very specific operational challenges that most organizations face, and we don't have time to get into these today. But when I say, wait, this is not an issue of technology, it's an issue of how people work, how the work is organized. If something should only take 30 minutes and it's taking 30 days, work is getting stuck. It's waiting. It's not being worked on. It's just sitting there stuck in the system. When I start to ask those questions, if I start to be curious, I can start to tease out the problem. Now it's like, okay, I need to get it so it takes only 10 days versus 30. What can I change in my workflow? The solution becomes much easier. And then you can build a technology product that actually hardwires in the right solution as compared to hardwiring in a system that just perpetuates what's been happening in the past. So it's a discipline to step back, understand your goal and the gap, and start asking about what's the problem in my workflow? What kind of measures do I have that are creating and incentivizing the wrong behaviors? What kind of fundamental assumptions or policies are in place from blocking me from achieving the goal? This is so important. All of our organizations are made up. They are a byproduct of how we think. They're not like gravitational pull or quark theory, right? Like some scientific law. They're manifestations of how we think. We believe something and then we build a product or a technology or a policy and a whole entire organization around it. Elon Musk is such a great example. He's been willing to challenge fundamental assumptions people have had. And that's what's accelerated, electrifying cars. In our own organizations, we understand the real problem is in our thinking, not in a new tool or a new product. We have a chance of getting the kind of breakthroughs that I think we all want and deserve.
Is it time to reach a new audience in a new way? Advertising on Everyday MBA gives you the opportunity to do just that. Each week, you'll reach thousands of listeners all tuned in to learn more about strategies, products, and approaches that will help them succeed. Your potential customers, clients, and supporters. For more information, just go to everyday-mba.com/sponsor. That's everyday-mba.com/sponsor.
You're listening to Everyday MBA.
We are speaking with Kristen Cox today about Stop Decorating the Fish, which problems to ignore and which problems really matter. It's a guide to identifying the right problem, setting an appropriate objective to solve it, and then avoiding solutions that don't work and may make the problem worse. Now, Kristen, we have reached the action item round of the show. I'm wondering if you can please provide us with 3 quick action items that our listeners can do to take advantage of the ideas and advice in your book.
Okay, I'll go back to the basics. In your organization or for your team, get really clear on the goal. Make it specific, make it ambitious, don't make it vague, and make sure it's something you can directly control and impact, right? Don't try to set a goal that changes everybody else. What do you have direct stewardship over? Start there. 2, inventory in your organization or your team, the seductive 7. Make a list, technology, more data, all the seductive 7, and start inventorying any new initiatives or work that's going on attached to those. And think about putting those on pause for a second. And then 3rd, ask yourself this question. What's preventing you from delivering on the original promise you gave to your customer? If you said to the customer, we're going to have a high-performing car that you can always count on and that's always reliable, or you will walk into our store and we will have the right inventory for you when you walk, you won't have to wait or order. Or if you're in government and you do a business permit, you'll have it processed within 2 days. What's that initial promise you made to your customer? And then ask yourself, why can't I achieve it today? And if you know it's not one of the seductive 7, those are just tools. You have to define the problem a little more deeply. This starts to create the mental discipline. We believe all organizations can get leaps in performance if we start thinking differently about the problem.
Kristen, it's been great speaking with you today. We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, one last question. You've given us some great advice here today, but what was the best piece of advice that you ever received, and how has it shaped who you are?
It came back from my mentors many, many years ago when I was going through my dark years of adjusting to being blind. And my mentor, Dr. Kenneth Jernigan, told me that it's all about mindset. What I believed had more to do about my success than anything else. And it's about questioning these fundamental assumptions we hold that we think limit us, that we can so easily just buy into without really questioning those. So he instilled in me the desire to never take anything for granted, to question things that are blocking me. If I know my goal and I'm not getting there, it's not because it's not impossible. I haven't just figured it out yet. It's always the question at the end of the day, Kevin, not if we can do something, but rather how we do it. And if we can understand the difference between those 2 words, I think almost anything is possible.
That is Kristen Cox. Stop decorating the fish, which problems to ignore and which problems really matter. Kristen, thank you so much for being our guest today on Everyday MBA.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure.
That'll do it for this episode of Everyday MBA. And do you want to be a guest on the show? It could happen. Join our Knowledge Leadership Circle and be featured in an interview of your own. Be a guest. Just Just go to everyday-mba.com/guest for more information. That's everyday-mba.com/guest.